Next day, I told him he hasn't even played a game yet. I said, I had a dream, Hal. I had a dream that you were going to be all Metro in December in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He goes, man, that's really awesome. I go, no, it's going to happen. I said, I promise you. I said, it's the most vivid dream I've ever had. And then we go on to lose only 2 games that entire year. So even though, we couldn't defeat the state champions on that day, we took a team from 1-6-1 all the way to the state championship. And a kid who never started quarterback in his life, who was, had a compound serious fracture, didn't know if it was ever going to be healed right, ended up on Christmas Day. I opened up that newspaper and he was all Metro.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. Today, I'm joined by the Ryan Banta. How are you doing today?
Good, buddy. Thanks for having me on your show. I look forward to talking and sharing with the audience.
Awesome. So kind of a little bit of background how we know each other. I was just posting about my podcasts, tagging my people, trying to just get engagement and stuff. And then Ryan slid my DMs and said, hey, I love the pod and I'd love to contribute if you'd be interested. And then I'm like, who's this like Sprinters Compendium guy? And then I was like, I'd love to just get to know you better. And if it seems like a good fit, we can definitely knock it out. And then you sent me like a Simply Faster article and I was like scrolling through it and I was like, oh, this is Ryan Banta. Like, I know who that is. I was like, whoa, no way. He wants to be on my podcast. So just kind of a funny story, but just the power of a DM. And I think we chatted for, what was that, 2.5 hours?
Yeah, it was a good conversation. Could have been a podcast of its own. It would have been not safe for some audiences, but
yeah, I definitely wish it could have been. But there's something about record that just changes it a little bit. But it was an awesome podcast nonetheless. And not to give your whole background, but Ryan is the head track and field girls coach at Parkway Central, one of the gazillion St. Louis high schools. And he's also the author of Sprinters Compendium. And your boy looked at what compendium means. It is a collection of concise but detailed information on a specific topic, especially in a book or publication. So I think your book is definitely a compendium. And you said a little bit more like a textbook because you got a lot of stuff in there. So for those who are not familiar, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
So yeah, I have always been a frustrated sprinter. Spent a lot of my career injured, both in high school and in college. But in between there, I fell in love with the sport, and it really gave me identity. If it wasn't for being like the fastest kid in my neighborhood or the fastest kid in my school, which I was for a long period of time, I don't know that I would have had the confidence that would have kind of came to fruition out of that, that would lead me to be able to be a coach and a teacher and things like that. And so, I graduated college and had a little bit of a different kind of idea of what I wanted to do with my career. And as they talk about in politics being a dirty business, it kind of left me disenfranchised, disillusioned with the process. And I kind of felt like politically I didn't have a home. And I wasn't going to continue to work for people who I couldn't trust or didn't share my values. And that was unfortunate. But I realized, oh no, now I've, kind of as a college draft pick in life, not for sports, I was kind of left without a sail, without a polar north, if you will, a direction in where I was going. And my mom, was a great educator in our school district. And she always pushed on me that, she thought I would have the skill set to be a good teacher. And it wasn't that I didn't want to do it, but it was one of those things where it's hard to fill the shoes of someone who is in your family that's exceptional. Imagine being the Harbaughs at Thanksgiving this weekend. How is that conversation going to look? And and it was like my mom had a reputation in our school district as being one of these excellent, great teachers, teacher of the year for the whole school district. She was awarded honors from all sorts of different publications in the St. Louis area. And I always thought if I could be good at anything like my mom is at teaching, I would certainly be excellent at the top of my class in something. And I'm still striving today to be that educator that she was and to live up to that reputation. But now I don't look at it as so much of being a burden as I look at it as being kind of the wind in my sails to continue to push me forward to strive to be better.
And as we chatted about on during our first phone call about And it's interesting, the more people I met who are high school track coaches, how it's just this whole crazy world in and of itself. But you having the challenge of being at a relatively smaller high school, it's a public high school, on how kind of similar to Feed the Cats, but not really. But it's kind of just like Be Ryan Banta, where it's your kids just enjoy you inside the classroom, similar to how we chatted before recording about teaching in person versus Zoom and just getting the kids to laugh at your jokes and your kids just all basically roasting you, saying that you were better in person. Uh, but can we chat a little bit about, before getting into the questions, just your struggles being at a smaller high school and how you make that happen track wise?
Yeah, so our school's kind of like a small dog. It doesn't realize how small it is. It's got a big yappy bark, and the problem with that though is that it's good to have that confidence. It's good to have that bravado. It's good to have all these programs that we're a part of. But a lot of times I look at it as we're slicing things very, very thin. When I was in high school, because I actually went to Parkway Central where I coach, so I understand the culture, I understand the people, I understand the demographics, all that kind of stuff. We're a super diverse school. So on top of being a mid-sized school, we were once one of the 5 or 10 largest schools. So a lot of our legacy programs and sports teams and extracurriculars have all these levels. So you got like your varsity, your JV, sophomore, freshman teams. And to try to field those programs and to field those teams is really difficult. And there's 3 other high schools besides us, and they're having the same problem. So it's a regional concern or issue. And a lot of times, I think the biggest challenge is how do you recruit kids in your school and not make all the other programs angry, and feeling as if you're stealing their kids. But at the same time, you can't kowtow to them. And I'm sorry that, it's like, no, you still have something of value in your program. And because you have value in your program and you're successful repeatedly, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. But how do you navigate it with confidence and at the same time don't make anybody really mad? And one of the things I realize is no matter what, pretty much every year, there's going to be a kid or a group of kids that are going to be split in what they want to do. They're going to feel pulled in 2 directions. And those kids naturally want to help programs, lots of programs. And they don't want to tell the coach that I've clearly made this decision because I want to be with this person. And so sometimes they'll use the out of, well, coach said this, or he thinks I could be this. And it's like, yeah, that's true. That's part of your decision. If I think you can be a Division I athlete, I'm pretty confident in it, especially after seeing measurables that are compared to previous measurables of data that I have in my program for decades. I'm pretty confident I know what I can do with you. But, it's one of those things where the kid doesn't want to make the soccer coach mad, doesn't want to make Coach Banta mad. And so that's a challenge. And then the demographics of our school have always been affluent, wealthy doctors, lawyers, college educators, things like that. But, we have a really diverse population. We have a large portion of students from East Asia and South Asia. We have the largest Jewish population in the St. Louis region. We have 16% of our school is African American, but then 50% of that number comes from the city. And then there's 50% that live in our community. So there's all of this. It's a potpourri, of experiences. And that's beautiful. And it makes for the most wonderful knowledge and learning inside the classroom and outside the classroom. But the challenge for us is we have all these programs that have all these levels. There's only so many kids. The kids are pulled in a lot of different directions. You have enthusiastic coaches. And then what is important to those groups of kids is going to be different. They go to different synagogues, churches, temples. So they have their collections. They're more likely to be hanging out with each other than a larger, more diverse group of people. And so that's a challenge to get everybody on the same page with, hey, I don't care what size, shape, color you are. This is what your flying 30 says. This is what your mile time says. I need you in my program. And I need you to be a part of this. And what sucks is that most of these kids don't come to track and field as their first sport. A lot of times track and field is either they liked me because of my classroom experience with them, because, I am a relatively popular teacher and I teach mostly freshmen. so I get like my first shot at them, but also, thinking about like, the idea of I've got to build this program year in and year out because they don't have this natural feeder system of kids that do track and field. We even have a swim club where the coaches for the swim club from, first grade all the way through high school are paid retirements through our Parkway school district. They're Parkway school employees. Well, so the most fit aerobic kid has been doing a club sport where that person gets paid like a teacher, So like it's hard. And so those things, I think, at a mid-sized school that acts like a big dog, that thinks it can bark and scare everybody, creates challenges because you're wanting to strive to that big school attitude, big school achievements, while you sometimes have some small school problems.
Super interesting. And not to get away from our questions, but that was one of the main things that I enjoyed about our first chat. And it's just so interesting hearing those stories kind of firsthand, because to the outsider, it's like, oh, you're just a high school track coach and you just make the kids run fast and that's all it is. Where that's really like, that's that's actually the easiest part. It's actually getting them to the track in the first place, and how to get them not intentionally away from their other sports, but there are all these other competing demands. So it was just interesting to hear you talk and compare and contrast how you not only do your job as a teacher, you're a teacher with a sprinting problem, but then also as a track coach, and you want to grow that program year in and year out. And, kids are only there for hopefully 4 years, but often probably less than that. So it's just interesting kind of just to hear firsthand on all those things that it's never going to be, those factors are never going to be a headline. It's never going to be anything super kind of open and out there. So thank you for sharing that. And that was super interesting, but we will get into it. What is the coolest story you have thus far in your career?
Well, I got a couple. So you're gonna make a choice here. All right. I've got some titles for it. All right. I've got one called The Silver Bat, The Prophet's Dream is the other one, or Catch 10. So which one do you want to hear? Silver Bat, Prophet's Dream, or Catch 10?
Prophet's Dream sounds a little ominous, so I like that. But then Catch 10 is just like, is 10 like a flying thing, like a sprinting thing?
Well, it depends on your attitudes and ideas about, what that looks like.
So I'll narrow it down from 2 to 3. So I'll say Prophet's Dream or Catch 10, and you get to pick between those two. How's that sound?
All right. So I'm going to do Prophet's Dream because it has more to do with speed and power. So a long time ago, I had an opportunity to be a football coach for my old football coach as well. And early on, I had a big problem. I was supposed to be the head JV football coach. And there was this guy who came in as an assistant coach, and he was a huge problem. He and I did not get along. We had a very, very rough and difficult relationship. And me telling you this, everybody knows this story. So it's not like I'm throwing anybody under the bus. But nevertheless, basically, we had a kind of a coaching divorce, if you will. And I went down and started coaching the freshman program, and he continued to coach JV. And, we worked with the head coach, who I love, and he's one of my mentors, and he's one of my good friends. And he's retiring this year, and I'm very sad to see him go because, we're like brothers, So anyway, so I was dedicated to helping him out and work with this program. But as we talked about earlier, we have a school that pretends it's a big dog, but it's a little dog, or a mid-sized dog. And so when we split up these football programs, we're already running into problems that a lot of football programs have across the country, which is diminishing numbers because of the inherent dangers that are perceived with football and CTE and, knee injuries and all this kind of stuff. So the lower level programs, we're always going to struggle because we just don't have the human resources that we need. And, obviously the varsity program is going to be first and foremost in terms of what's important. So I had an opportunity to coach this freshman team. And the first year I got to coach them, we were terrible. We were 1-6-1. But with these kids, there were abilities and talents that I had not seen. We just weren't very good at football yet. And I knew that if I could have these kids for a long enough period of time, again, like 4 years, I thought they have the ability, regardless of what because I was one of the 3 freshman football coaches. I wasn't the guy making the decisions in terms of offense and defense. I was there as a special teams guy only at that point, because I was originally the deal was if I'm going to stay in the program, I'm going to do this and focus on the kids and recruiting kids into the program, all this kind of stuff. So anyway, so I had a guy on my team, and his nickname was Fluffy, and that wasn't ironic. He was soft, he was a crier, he was a baby. But I saw that if he was a big guy, and he was the fastest guy I'd ever seen for 3 steps. And so when the season was over, I like projects. And so I told him, I said, hey man, I see something in you that we've just got to pull out of you. And I think that if you trust in me and training and you buy in working in the off seasons with me, I can turn you into a monster, because there's very few people that naturally have those first 3 steps at your size. I mean, he was a big dude, but he was just a big, soft baby. I mean, he looked like baby Huey, Well, he believed in what I was doing. Him and a couple of his other friends came along with me, and we were working in the hot summer, and they had to renovate our gym. So they had no air conditioning. We're working in this gym. It's sweaty. It's dirty. The bars are all rusted. So you got rust all over your shirt. I mean, it was like some old school stuff. And we're in there working hard. And it was the first year was only like 3 or 4 guys, but we would run and do like track related workouts for like an hour and a quarter. And then we'd go in for another 2 hours and lift. And we did that every day. And then I was hired after my first year to become the varsity strength and conditioning coach eventually. Well, we radically changed all of these guys. And so when these guys were sophomores, they ended up getting a little bit of time on varsity. So now I've got these same kids that were with me. And during the time when I had these kids as a freshman, one of the kids that was working with us on a regular basis, he had broken his arm so severely, had a compound fracture. His arm looked like a U, and he was playing receiver at that time. And he ended up spending, a lot of time rehabbing, and then we started working out. And this kid got transformed as well and looked like a man. He was this itty bitty little kid, and then he had his buddy who's this big fat, kind of softy looking baby Huey baby. And these guys within just 1 year began to look like adults, and they're only sophomores in high school. So nevertheless, the next season I was with varsity. The varsity team did really well, and the varsity team the first year did really well. Well, then at this point, I get everybody between their sophomore and junior year to start training with me. And we end up going deep into the playoffs that next year. And we end up, being really, really, really successful. And at this point now, I'm spending more time in the summer between all the workouts I'm doing with all of these kids than I would be as a teacher there at school. So my day would start at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would leave at 3:30. Well, school stopped at 2:30. So this is how much work these kids were putting in. And I know that there are people out there talking about minimum effective dose, and some of the stuff that I was doing, I might not do now, but we were kind of in this attitude of like the 300 Spartans, and the Persians are trying to push through that small crack in the earth to come get the rest of our city state. And we're like, we're not going to do that. These kids ended up playing both ways, starting both ways, their junior and senior year. The same team that was 1-6-1, we ended up going to the state championship, a freshman team that sucked, that was terrible. And by the time they were seniors, they were playing in the state championship, playing both ways. We only had 37 guys on our varsity football team. So they had to play an exorbitant amount of time. And all of those starters were the same kids. Terrible as freshmen, amazing at seniors. Now, that's not the cool story. The cool story is in August, I woke up with this dream that I was reading the newspaper on Christmas Day. And on Christmas Day, back in the day, like this is, well over a decade ago now, you open up the newspaper and they do the St. Louis All-Metro team. And the All-Metro team is better than the All-State teams because it includes classes, 6 through 1, and it includes East St. Louis. And if anybody doesn't know anything about East St. Louis football, they're dominant, okay? And it includes the Missouri side of St. Louis. And I remember in the paper reading about John Petrov, who is the guy who's this baby softy, and this kid, Hal Martin, who broke his arm when he was a freshman. And I remember reading this is in my dream, that Hal Martin and John Petrov ended up being all Metro in that paper. And then you have to understand, Hal Martin did not start at quarterback until his senior year. John Petrov was a lot better earlier and made huge gains. Was one of the top discus throwers in the country and as a junior and all this kind of stuff. He ended up being an absolute freak and set a bunch of position physical fitness records for Northwest Missouri State, which has been a perennial Division II champion. So this guy who sucked, who was every bit his name Fluffy, by the time he was a senior, his name was, it was ironic, because it was like, no, that's absolutely not who he is. It's like calling somebody Little John when he ain't little at all, So I open up the paper, I read it. There's Hal Martin in the paper, all Metro. Next day, I told him he hasn't even played a game yet. I said, I had a dream, Hal. I had a dream that you were going to be all Metro in December in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He goes, man, that's really awesome. I go, no, it's going to happen. I said, I promise you. I said, it's the most vivid dream I've ever had. And then we go on to lose only 2 games that entire year. We lost to Eureka in a fourth quarter field goal that we barely missed. And then we lost to Lee Summit West, which at the time had 130 guys on their varsity roster versus us who had 37. So even though, we couldn't defeat the state champions on that day, we took a team from 1-6-1 all the way to the state championship, and a kid who never started quarterback in his life, who was, had a compound serious fracture, didn't know if it was ever going to be healed right, ended up on Christmas Day. I opened up that newspaper and he was all Metro. It's crazy what self-belief can do. It's crazy what you have a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of work, those kids can be transformed. And, obviously over that time period, I was, learning a lot and developing a lot, and we were getting a lot of stuff done. But it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever seen of a group that was horrible, which seemed to have no talent, to be transformed simply through their effort over time.
How early was this in your coaching career?
So I started coaching football 2 years into my coaching career. So I coached, let's see. So it was spring of 2002, my first coaching job. Fall of 2002, I was a cross-country coach. So it would have been fall of 2003 was my first coaching job. And that's where that whole situation happened with the JV football coach and I. We had our little divorce, and I started coaching freshmen. And then he no longer coached football after like that 1 year. And I moved my way up into the varsity program. And in that, it was neat because I got to go with those kids for 4 years. And that's very rare that you get that opportunity in football to intimately work with those kids. And again, I'm working with those kids. We were working out like 6 hours a day. Now, of course, in the middle there, they would have lunch, and we'd have a break time. But we were doing everything I could possibly do to try to build these kids up progressively. So
my boss always says is that a coach is all about pulling out of people and bringing them to where they could never go themselves. And hence that's why people go and get coaches, because they need someone else to help get them there. But just speaking on belief, kind of as you summed up that story, there's this overweight kid, is just like playing football just because like, oh, it's like the cool sport. And then there's this guy that goes, yo, like you can actually like do something. You can actually be something. Like I want to help get you there. And it's been a theme of multiple recent podcasts is like they either had that figure in their life or they've been that figure to other people, where it's like just knowing that someone is like genuinely believing in you when you don't often believe in yourself because you know yourself firsthand and you know all of your shortcomings. But when there's someone that says, no, I'm gonna look on the flip side of the coin. I'm gonna see where we can take this thing, as opposed to you just constantly pointing out where you don't where you fall short. So I can't even imagine, just how impactful that's been. And do you know where those two guys are now?
Yeah. So funny thing, Petrov, who was also a person who wasn't very studious early on, but he was smart, and I knew he was smart. He was also a little bit argumentative, which was kind of fun too. He's now got a master's degree, a doctorate from WashU in chemistry. So he's a guy who had F's and D's and was not ironically called fluffy, zero confidence, chubby kid, to now being a member of a team that won a national title in college, took a football team to the state championship in high school, one of the top discus throwers in the country when he was in high school, also was a national qualifier in college in discus as well, to becoming a married father of 2 children and a freaking doctor, So one conversation can ignite a person's life. That's so powerful. And that's what's scary too, because it can also ignite somebody in a real bad way. So we've got to always come with love and caring and confidence and respect to make sure that we narrow down those errors in those kids' heads. Because like you said, it's like we have our self-doubts, and those doubts are what hold us back from really achieving whatever the best version of ourselves could be. Like I didn't think I could be a teacher, and now this is my career, and I wake up every freaking day pumped to see those kids. I'd much rather see them in person, but if I got to see them behind a screen for now, that's okay. And I would like to say that probably the most important thing that viewers can get out of this is that belief is the most powerful performance enhancing drug. There is nothing more that can do more than belief.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I always got to tie back into coaching and training. I love it. But for those, so I went to school in Missouri, and I'm familiar with the St. Louis area. And WashU isn't exactly the easiest school out there. I think it's top 5 in however many programs they have. So that's definitely a feat in and of itself. But last question kind of on that topic, just briefly, if you remember that first conversation in however much detail, how did he kind of take that? Was he hesitant? Was he kind of like wide-eyed, like, let's do this? Or how did that first interaction go down when you reached out?
It's interesting. There wasn't, and I know it's going to be kind of disappointing for the listeners, but there wasn't an overt reaction. There was kind of this looking to the analytical side of the brain, right? And then kind of this head shake and goes, okay, so what's this going to look like? Was basically his next question. So like, when are we getting started? What are we doing? How is this going to go? And early on, I actually failed him a little bit because I was going to give him a weight routine that was going to be like a push-pull system. And I didn't put that together. I mean, full disclosure, I did not put that together for him right away because, football season, Thanksgiving, all that kind of stuff. And then basically it was on to winter conditioning. And I basically, made sure that he was with me, but I never gave him that individualized plan right out of the gate that we had discussed, because at that point I was like, we just need to get stuff done. There are these basic things like we need to power clean, we need to squat, we need to bench, we need to deadlift. I'm not worried about a push pull. We need to get as many of these opportunities, the frequency of efforts and contacts that we can get. And I remember 2 years later, after he and I even had a closer relationship, he's like, remember you never gave me that push pull system. I'm like, we threw that out. I said that just the juice wasn't worth the squeeze at that point, and I wanted to do this instead, because at that point you weren't going to be on your own. I was going to be with you, and I'd much rather be able to, flex the schedule week to week, depending on what I wanted to see from you. And I did a lot of experimenting on him. We were running through 3-week phases, and we were doing some stuff that I probably would not do now. Like we were doing things where we would power clean with the bar. We'd throw the bar plyometrically, catch the bar and bring it back down. Yeah. Crazy, crazy stuff that I would never do now, but I was young and dumb. And by the way, listeners, don't do that with your athletes. Okay. But we were doing stuff because I was just trying to push the envelope with these guys as much as I could. And a lot of that influence came from a strength guy called Franz Bosch. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's kind of like a running mechanics guy and a unique strength guy. He's out in Europe. So I was trying to be inventive. And so what I've learned obviously now is that the classics work a lot better than that stuff. But there were things that we did that I never, and it produced crazy, crazy results. But I was probably on the razor's edge of some not razor's edge. I was over the razor's edge on some dangerous activities. But I remembered him kind of being like, okay. And that was almost like in his head, he had already made the decision. I'm fully committing. I'm on board. Now, what are we doing? What's this going to look like? Prove to me that you are going to do what you said you're going to do, Coach Banta, was kind of the response that I got from him.
Awesome. Throwing down the gauntlet. So next big question, what's the story most fundamental leading you to now? So without X, you would not be here.
So it's interesting. So a lot of times people talk about like, I met this coach or it was this training method. It was more like me learning vicariously from others. It was never a direct lesson. So I want to tell you a little story. So the first year that I coached track, we were really good. We broke the school record in the 100, the 200, the 400, the 4x1, the 4x2. So I thought I knew everything. And I had a girl that was the second fastest girl in the 100 and 200 ever all time in my program as well. And so I thought I knew everything. Well, that was a mistake. I had to get punched, so to speak, figuratively in the face for another 4 years in a row after that, where we weren't anywhere near as successful. I had a hard time getting kids to state, where that first year, all of those events qualified for state, and we were all state and everything except for one, And so early on, you come in and you're ignorant and you're excited and you kind of have this bravado of you, where you haven't been knocked down enough or humbled enough to realize, man, I don't know everything. And so after about the fourth year, my assistant coach, who was one of my teachers when I was in high school, he basically threw down the gauntlet. And he said to me, he goes, look, man, if you don't get better and you don't focus on this entire program, I'm not going to coach with you. And he basically alluded to, I'm going to make it really hard for you to continue to coach here. I wasn't a teacher at that time. And so this is a mentor, a person who taught me, a person who agreed to coach with me, who's basically saying, I'm going to throw you under the bus, and I'm not going to coach with you if you don't get this stuff squared away. I'm sick and tired of kind of covering for your faults. And so that really made me step back. I didn't like hearing it. It takes me a while to process things, Matt. Like when somebody says something to me, I'll be like, I don't know. And sometimes I'll come back the next day and be like, all right, here's what we're going to do, or here's why we're going to continue to do what I'm doing. Let me explain. Or you're right, let's see how we can adjust. But early in my career, it took me a real long time. I mean, it could take me months. But thankfully, I had a little bit of time between that track season and the fifth year. And over that time, I said, okay, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get involved in the USATF and get the coaching schools for that. I'm going to reach out to some top flight coaches and see if I can pick their brains and see if I can cut and paste their workouts. Well, needless to say, we ended up having a really, really good year the next year. I did everything that my mentor wanted me to do. And halfway through the season, he goes, he's a good guy. So he's like, Banta, you're now on your way to being a good coach. He goes, now the challenge is, you've got to maintain these things so that you can continue to be successful. This cannot be a one and done. You can't be like 2003. You've got to be like 2007, which is where we were at that point. We ended up winning our first district title. Now, that's not the important story. The important story is there was another coach in the St. Louis area who I couldn't stand. He used to make me so mad. He was really, really good. He was at one of the biggest schools in the state. He had all these distance kids. He was running fast girls that were white in distance events. And I was mad because I'm like, those girls should be sprinters, but you're just doing that because you want them to be distance runners and you want to overload them, AKA I was kind of like feed the cats before feed the cats. Okay. And I just couldn't stand him. I couldn't stand how successful he was. And it just drove me nuts. Now, meanwhile, I never talked to the guy. I just developed this disdain for him because I had not evolved as a coach to ask myself the question, why do I not like this guy because he's successful? Well, the answer is because I'm not happy where I'm at and I'm insecure about where I'm at, even though my mentor just told me that we're doing a good job. It wasn't good enough for me yet. And psychologically, positive psychology, this is true. Research shows us that it takes 5 positives of equal weight to subtract that 1 negative of the same weight in your life. So I was really battling through that. We ended up winning our first district title in school history. Our school's never won one. We won our first in my first 5 years as a coach. And I was on my way to being a much better coach. And sure enough, the guy I couldn't stand who I just hated. I was so happy to finally beat him. He was the first guy to walk up and shake my hand and say, congratulations. And I'm like, dude, this guy again is making me mad because he's showing class that I never showed. And here I am, this selfish little man baby who's super happy that I won. And I'm super proud of the team and my assistant coaches. And here's this guy stepping in and teaching me a lesson again about class, which is be proud and happy for your competitors if they're respectful and they're doing things the right way. Well, now that guy is one of my best friends, and we talk weekly. This guy I used to not be able to stand and tolerate, because at that moment it was a slap in the face for me to go, oh, this guy really is a good guy. I've been the villain. I've been the bad guy this whole time. I've never shown the respect to seek out a winner of a track meet and congratulate them. So that's one. And then the second part of this is a story. While I was researching and learning, I met this guy, Coach Burris, who coaches Justin Robinson, who's the world #1 in the 400-meter dash, and the kid hasn't even gotten out of high school yet. Okay, he's going to be a freshman in college, but he's probably going to run pro, whatever. Probably be in the Olympics next year if we have it. He's a really talented kid. Burris is a master of training and design, and much like Coach Carey, the guy I was just talking about who shook my hand, he's built programs after programs after programs and been very successful through belief and through solid training. And so when I met Burris, I was blown away at the workouts and the construction that he did. And he brought me in and taught me everything. And I realized that kids can work a lot harder than I thought they could. Again, remember, I was feed the cats before feed the cats. I didn't want my kids to run a 4x4. They didn't like it. I was always running my kids in the 100 and 200 because those are the sexy events, and the 4x1 and 4x2. Remember, when I mentioned all those events I broke in 2003, we didn't talk about a 4x4. That didn't happen. We didn't have one, even though we could have been probably top 3 in state in that event if I would have woke up. Anyway, so Burris and I ended up competing against each other. He coached at a high school that was at the same size and the same district as us. Now, meanwhile, as my program began to flourish, so did his. Our programs ended up being 2 of the top programs in the state. There was a girl that was on my program who's kind of my secret weapon. She started to hurdle. He didn't know about this. So then at the end of the season, when he started seeing her hurdle, he was calling me up and he's like, hey, Banta, I don't think she should hurdle. She's a much better flat sprinter. And I knew what he was doing. I knew what he was doing. He's like, hey, I don't want her to be in this event, because these are points that it's close. And if she scores points in this event, I got nobody to kind of balance her out. So we get to the district championship, another district championship. This was in 2009. And she is competing and he's there and we're talking because we're friends. We're really good friends, but we also both want to win the state title. And she's doing something funky in the hurdles that's not good. He says, Banta, are you comfortable with me? I see something. Are you comfortable with me talking to her? You can come over and listen. And I said, yeah, you can go talk to her. He goes, okay, I think I can fix something. So he talked to her about her body position, getting to the front of her feet, attacking with a lean into the hurdles more instead of being straight up and kind of back. And sure enough, she goes out and runs a full second faster than she ever ran in her life. And she qualified to the sectional meet and eventually became all state and the second fastest girl in school history in the 100 hurdles and our school record holder in the 300 hurdles. Now, what's the point of the story? The point of the story is, again, being happy for someone, being all that kind of stuff's great. But being a really, really good coach is helping people even if it's going to hurt your bottom line, because rising tide raises all ships. And here's this guy who in his head, his analytical brain's like, I don't want her hurdling because this could keep us from winning the state title. But his heart said, I got to help this kid because this kid's trained with me. Coach Banta's trained with me. We've been on a summer track team together. I owe it to this girl to help her and to help Coach Banta. And so he stepped in and did it, even though it meant that she was going to score points and make it much more difficult for him at the state championship. Those are the people that I want to be around. I want to be around growth mindset people, abundance mindset people versus scarcity people. And that's what led me to write the book and to put all that information out there, even though some of my mentors were like, you're going to give away all your ideas. People are going to beat you with it. So what? that means that kid who has that coach who may beat me is going to have a better experience, a better chance at a college experience than they would have. They're going to be able to master their ability, match or meet or exceed their expectations and get closer to their potential. That's what we do as educators. That's why we're in the sport, is to make life better for these young people, to build confidence through them, to realize the efforts of their work into a performance. And so here, Coach Carey was super happy for me. He knew what a big deal it was when I won my first district title. He was the first person to come over and shake my hand, even though I beat him. And it was a streak that we broke his streak of district titles. That was like 5 or 6 years in a row. And here I am, the guy who didn't like him. And he didn't know that. He didn't know this. And when I told him the story later, it led to a lot of laughs over some beer, And then here's this other guy who we worked together shoulder to shoulder. And here we are competing in our high school teams. And he, again, he didn't want the points, but he knew it was important for that kid. So he stepped in and corrected that kid's performance anyway. Those are the people I want to be around. And that was transformative for me in terms of my purpose on what I can provide others moving forward that provided for me when I was young.
There's some quote I'm totally going to mess up. It's like, what you see, you are, what you see is in me, or something like that. But there's those people, whatever you don't like about them, it's like often stuff you have in yourself. And it's so funny, just like how many ignorant things I've said and I will continue to say, but kind of just how time progresses and changes all things. And I actually have a similar story. A good friend of mine, he was on the podcast 68, Keith Scruggs, South Carolina, indoor and beach volleyball. Super smart guy. He's about to defend his doctorate and everything. And my first year with the TCU beach volleyball team, South Carolina was at a lot of the tournaments. He's just this like loud out there strength coach, just like getting everyone's attention. I'm just like, oh my, this guy's so annoying, but because he's in that role, he's got that full-time job, like he's super into it and all this stuff. And then it was my second year. We were both at the same hotel at Florida State. and we had just got back from our day before matches practice. And they walk in the hotel. I'm like, oh gosh, here's South Carolina, And then and I see him walking towards me. I'm like, oh gosh, like I do not want to talk to this guy. Like, what does he want, And I had my polar heart rate bag on. And then he walked up. He's like, oh, do you do the heart rate stuff for the girls? Which he knew I did because he'd seen me for 2 years. And I was like, yeah, we use the Polar Team Pro. He's like, oh no way, me too. I was like, oh, like how do you like just use it? And then we kind of got in that conversation, and then we stayed in touch. And he's been just super fundamental, just like we're good friends now. And I'm super grateful that he came up and said hello that one day. He came up to me and saw something in my mind, I was just like some GA who just like looks at their heart rates and stuff. But he was just like, oh, there's this value in having this conversation. So just kind of what I've been able to learn from him and just like his friendship, just like, man, like he's such a nice guy. Like I didn't even know anything about him and I just like wrote him off. So those stories are super funny. And then the last thing you kind of touched on about, oh man, there's like 3 parts to your story, but anyways, super cool story on kind of just how time changes all things, and like whatever you see, you are, and whatever you like in other people also is things that you want to be yourself. So I think you should definitely listen to your intuition when it comes to stuff like that, positive or negative. Just trust yourself, but then kind of just figure out what to take from it and what to kind of discard as just being kind of irrational. But I remember about writing the book.
Yeah.
And this, so where I coach at TC Boost Sports Performance, we have this thing called our ADP, our athletic development program, where it's a full year of training, 4 seasons. And then within each season is like 3 4-week blocks. So it's, 12 months of training, speed, warm-ups, speed, lifting for youth, JV, which is middle school, varsity, which is high school. We have a college one also. And, little intern Matt 4 or 5 years ago was like, have you ever thought about selling this? Like, how much money do you think you could get from it? And then one of the main people who helped write it was like, well, that's not the point. Like anyone can have a program. It's how we coach it. It's the coaching cues. It's the interacting with the kids and the experience, And I'm sure someone could take Ryan Banta's program, but they're not going to coach it how you coach it, And
Right. Well, and they're going to make judgments about it too that may not actually be the intentions. So like I misunderstood Coach Carey at Marquette. And so I applied these negative aspects because I didn't understand what he was doing and why he was doing it. And now as a friend of his, I mean, there are so many things that I took from his program that benefited me when I stopped resisting. Like, I'm going to discredit everything because of my own inner demons. Right. And like you said, yeah, you could take my program and, it's not the recipe. It's always the cook, right? It's always the cook. And so it's nice, and we can talk more about this. It's nice to have scaffolding and to have programs that give you some sort of step into the realm of correct training, right? But it's really more about the people who are the practitioners that are making it happen versus the recipe you could find on the internet.
And you kind of just speaking through your book and why you wanted to put it out there, all these things that you admired in those two coaches, that was you doing just what they did, just in a little bit different context. So super cool kind of how it comes full circle. And last big story, briefly try to keep this under an hour to get to the last story. And then I'm sure we could go for another 2.5, but
yeah.
What is the story you're most proud of thus far in your career?
All right. So I have a young lady back in the day, and she was really good right out of the gate. Now, she was a middle distance kid, long distance kid eventually, but she had a lot of talent and she was very enthusiastic. And she was one of the kids that actually was a part of our summer track program before she ever came into high school. I think she might have been the first kid to ever do that. Usually we wait till the kids are in high school because we want to kind of teach our culture and our program and all that kind of stuff. And she was varsity right away, really early. And we thought, looking at her workouts and the training and everything that she was able to do and her enthusiasm and her mechanics, this kid looked every part of an all-state athlete. But what I didn't know is how much she struggled with not depression, but lack of confidence, anxiety, worry, and all this kind of stuff. And so every year we would get to the end of the season and she would blow up. Even though her workouts were really great, she would run really well without pressure and training. She was killing other girls on her program that were good. And by the way, she was a great recruiter and a great teammate, but she just was soul crushed with the pressure that she put on herself. And I remembered that there was a time where I'm sitting in front of the classroom. Again, there's all these evolutions of Coach Banta. You never stop learning, you never stop adapting, you never stop growing. You got to constantly be self-aware and reflective on your mistakes. And so here I've got this big old chart of the cross-country season, and I'm like, here's what we can do, and here's your win-loss record versus these kids, and this is what you're able to do, and this is what your times say you're able to run. And a lot of the girls in the room were like, yeah, let's do it. And I see the kid in the back, when I talk about her individually, I just see her going in her chair and sinking down into her chair. And not to be funny, like she was genuinely worried. And just like I told you in the beginning about that young man who I flipped the switch in a positive way, I flipped the switch in a negative way on her. I basically just threw 200 pounds of cold, hard iron on her shoulders for the rest of the season. And sure enough, she blew up again. And then one of the interesting things is then we have open races the next week for the kids who didn't qualify, because in cross country, everybody wants to keep running. It's a different thing than a lot of other sports. And she would go out and she would run PRs every time after districts with no pressure. And so it was so incredibly frustrating. And I was so mad, not at her, but just like, what can I do to fix this kid? I had no skill sets to do it. Luckily enough, she had run enough fast times, looked the part, was serious about it. And even though she couldn't run fast times when it mattered, she was able to run pretty decent times throughout the season. She was a very smart kid. And so she wanted to go to Butler, just like her sister. And she luckily got to talk to the coach there. And I spoke highly of her to the coach. And the coach said, yeah, you absolutely can be a part of our team. Here's the information. This is when we're going to start our season. And she's like, whoa, wait a second. She's like, you mean I can run a Butler, a Division I program, which actually has one of the best programs in distance running in the country for their conference, and everything? And he's like, yeah. And all of a sudden, everything I'd been telling her, all the workouts she had been putting in, that switch of all that cold, hard steel I threw on her shoulders just got destroyed and dissipated and pushed off of her by that college coach in that one moment, because it was someone else who had no vested interest in her. She believed that person. She's like, oh, I guess I am a Division I runner, even though my dad's been telling me that, my mom's been telling me that, my coach has been telling me that in high school, but they tell me that because they just want me to feel okay. It's not because they really believe it. At that moment, she believed it. Now, also positive, before that moment, she ended up running. We do an exit ticket mile in cross country, and she'd run a ridiculously fast mile for her at that point. And she was like, okay, I guess I am kind of, I am physically prepared. So that moment that she proved to herself, and then that moment with that college coach, changed the game. She went on and dominated the rest of the season, PR'd at every race throughout the year, chipping away time, winning, medaling. It was like it was a whole different person. Now, that's not the big point of the story. The big point of the story is at the end of the year, we get to the district meet. And I'm like, she's so good. There's no way that she doesn't get out of districts. And she did. She got out of districts, ran well. We get to sectionals. Now the pressure is bigger than it's ever been because she's never actually been to sectionals as a qualifier onto her own efforts. She's gotten to sectionals because she had a cross-country team that got her there, or a 4x8, or she was part of a relay, but she'd never done it when it's on her. Gets out in the 4x8, we run really well. I got a girl, which was the story about catch 10. We don't have time for that, but she was super fast. So she basically made up any mistakes that we would make. And Kara was really fast in the 4x8 because she was running with other girls. We qualified. She didn't qualify as an individual. We get to the mile. And sure enough, 1,000 meters in, she goes all the way to the back. You got to be top 4 to qualify. She's in 8th position. And I'm like, well, here we go again. Meanwhile, her dad's sitting right next to me too. So I can't say the things I want to say. Like I'm all this, again, my own demons in my head of here we go again. We're not going to break through this barrier. And then I see her look left and look right. And she just went for it. She slammed the hammer down and just went for it. Said, if you're going to get me, I'm going to go at 600 meters left. That's a long way to go. You're going to have to come get me. She made a decision. She wasn't going to doubt herself anymore. She was going to make everybody come get her. And of course, she does end up getting caught by one of the girls at the very end, but she qualified, ran the fastest time she ever ran in her life. Her dad and I are crying, tears of joy. I'm hugging her father. I'm just sobbing. I get emotional just thinking about it right now. And never been happier for a kid because of what they did themselves. Goes to state. We're all state in the 4x8. She runs a decent time in the mile. She qualified also in the 2 mile. Had a great career. Most improved single season athlete I've ever had. She went to Butler. She was on conference championship teams there. It was great. But that isn't the big deal of the story. The big deal of the story at that point is I made the decision that I was never going to not have the skills to help a kid like that, which is what led me to go get my master's in positive psychology, because I don't want to have a kid be completely reliant on the very small chance that a Division I coach at a good college is going to say, yeah, you can walk on. I'm going to do the things I need to do to prepare those kids to believe in themselves with real skills, real drills and things to help fix that mental attitude. And I'm also going to be very, very conscientious on how I talk, the things that I say, the way that I push buttons with the athletes, all that kind of stuff. But that's not even the biggest part of the story. The biggest part of the story is that Kara decided to go to college for, fertility medicine. Now, why is that a big part of the story? Well, meanwhile, while I was in high school, or she was in high school with me and I was coaching her, we were struggling, my wife and I, to get pregnant because my wife can't get pregnant the old-fashioned way. And through the pregnancy, we ended up having triplets at that point, but we lost 2 of them in utero. And thank God, miracles of medicine and faith and all this kind of stuff, we did end up getting one of our daughters to make it to the finish line and survive. And she's 7 years old and she's beautiful and sweet and cute. Kara was in school while I was going through that entire time. And so Kara said to me, Banta, I'm doing this for you and for all the other parents that want to have kids, because you believed in me. I'm going to help others. Dude, there is no more powerful story I will ever have as a coach. It has nothing to do with sport. It has to do with love and respect, all that stuff.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And with stories like that, it's like the first, every time you guys talk, it's never going to be, do you remember my PR? Or
Right.
how cool is it when I ran that time, or So you might remember those X's and O's as a coach, but like that's not what she's gonna be talking about literally the rest of her life. So that's cool that's just a crazy story, and how there was like 7 points to it, but
Yeah.
And just for you and your wife and your family and for all that stuff, and how, oh my gosh, it's so much beyond the X's and O's, and that's why I don't have a training podcast, because people talk about that enough as is, but it's like, man,
Right.
those are the stories that make people's careers and lives what it is. So that's a super cool story. So thank you for sharing that. And last two things. First thing is the action steps, and then second thing is I'll open the floor up to you. But although I do love the stories, me being ignorant Matt saying ignorant things as I'm about to ask you for X's and O's. But we are all professionals in this thing we call sports performance. What are 1 to 3 things that the listener can start doing tomorrow to become better?
So I'm going to give you 4 because I'm extra like that. So we're just going to have to deal with it. So I'm going to give you the things. So, and I'm going to explain them after I give them to you. So you need to make a cadre of like-minded peers, and you need to be intentional with that. And we'll talk about that. You need to humble yourselves, and instead of hating the people that are really, really great, you need to figure out why they're great and call them. And then I also believe you need to read about high achievers that aren't in your field, unrelated high achievers. And then finally, you need to be a master in the classics. So a cadre of like-minded coaches. How you get that done is you need to have a group of friends that you spend time with who are in your sport. And it needs to be away from the track, the gym, the weight room, the facility. And you need to spend time with them. You need to spend time with them breaking bread, eating, hanging out. Because as you develop those strong bonds, first of all, you got a support network in town with you. But secondly, they're going to be able to and be more willing to help you solve problems that you might not even realize you're going to have. There was a movie with Chris Hemsworth, and he was a Formula One driver. I don't know if you remember that movie. I forget what it's called. But basically, there's this story about him and then this other German Formula One driver, and there's a dangerous track that day. And it's really rainy and wet. And the guy who's the German says, listen, this is, or the European guy, this is really, really dangerous. We shouldn't do this. And, he's almost got the room convinced. And Chris Hemsworth comes in and goes, nah, we can do it. We're going to prove who the best drivers are. It's not that big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. And he looks over at the German guy, and goes, sometimes it's not always good to be right. It's better to be loved, because even when you're right, if I can win the room because everybody likes me better, it doesn't matter if you're right. And it's one of those things where it's like, I want to be right and I want to be liked, but I also want to have support and help, because sometimes there's problems I can't solve and they can help me solve it, but they're also going to circle up your game. So like if you're the smartest person in your circle, you need a new circle. Okay. Calling the greats. Once I had all those experience I told you about, I wasn't afraid to call anybody. I mean, my book, I got 50 coaches in there. I got Tony in there. I got Corfist, who you had on recently, in there. The mad genius with his science lab in the basement and his fish tanks and his pulley systems and, all the stuff that he does, and Corfist and I've never really, I don't think we've talked face to face. It's all been through keyboard, but I respect the hell out of that guy, even though like he's doing things and he would probably disagree with some of the things that I'm doing. But I respect that. What are you doing? What is this? I want to know, as opposed to being like, it's like, no, I want to know the reasons why, the methodology, all that kind of stuff. You call those people. So I had the pleasure of interacting with Aeneas Williams, who is a defensive back Hall of Famer for the St. Louis Rams and the Arizona Cardinals. And one of the lessons that he taught me, and, we were around, his daughter went to my high school and his son is a part of my buddy's summer track club. One of the things he told me, he goes, listen, when I came into the sport, I called up every Hall of Famer at my position and I asked them, can I buy you lunch or a coffee? And I traveled around the country and I sat down with these people and I broke bread with them and just talked to them about life, training, the sport, the X's and O's, because I wanted to pick everyone's brain about how to get this done. Now, this guy came out of a small college and he went on to be one of the best defensive backs in NFL history, in large part because he was willing to humble himself, to turn over every stone he could find and to reach out to the greats who had already got it done. Why try to learn this stuff on your own when the greats can help guide you or at least clarify for you? So I think that's really important. Reading high achievers outside of your area, there's so much cross-pollination that can come from people who are really, really great at what they do. And when I mean high achievers, I'm saying like, hey, if you're a sports person, what do musicians do? Yes, some are virtuous, amazingly talented people, but what you end up usually finding out is there's a lot more behind their story than you realize. There's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of work, there might have been an eccentric mentor, whatever it is, there are lessons to be learned and opportunities for you to go in an area that no one is exploring in your sport because they've got blinders on. They're like, this is what we're doing. We're going to feed the cats. We're going to do critical mass. I'm going to listen to Tony. I'm going to listen to Clyde Hart. Okay, great. But beyond those people, you might have somebody you can learn from like Benjamin Franklin about purposeful practice, and achievement. And you never realized that you could learn something from him, and it could apply to your sport. It could apply to coaching. And then the last thing is being a master of classics is this idea of you need to know why these people were so successful at what they were doing, but you also need to practice them to know it for yourself, to figure it out. So that way you can blend the best of all of those systems or apply the tool that's the best tool for the problem that makes it the quickest and easiest and most effective to create the solution. If you're not a master in those classics, you are going to shortchange yourself by falling down a rabbit hole of what I would think is cult-like thinking. Don't be in a cult, be an open-minded person that can apply different principles and ideas to your life, because not everything that person did is maybe the right way to do it. Like, I love Clyde Hart for all the stuff that he did for track and field, but I don't do the order of practices that he does. Because in my research and development, it's like, I get why he was doing that, but it'd probably be better to do that on a different day. Or it'd probably be better to not do that volume and load right away. From my own personal experience, this seems to be the right path to do that. But that doesn't mean we should just be running flying 10s all the time when we're going to run the 400. Like, you need to train at the event in which you're going to compete at. If you're going to run a marathon, you can't just run mile repeats. You're going to eventually have to run a long run. If you're going to run the 100-meter dash, you can't just be running repeat 350s and 450s. You're going to have to run some 30-meter accelerations. You're going to have to run 40s. You're going to have to get in the weight room. So if you master the classics, your tool chest becomes so much larger and you can achieve what I call flow state, which is you apply different principles and ideas and philosophies to the problem versus you applying these things that you think are the way to go versus being prescriptive, which is better. Address it, see it, evaluate it, apply the right tool.
Getting the why not only from people within your space, but also outside of your space and people that came before in your space, if I had to succinctly sum that up. So very cool, very actionable. So last thing, you've been more than gracious giving me your time, talking some shop. So I'm opening up the floor so you can shamelessly plug everything that you got going on.
Well, so if people want to find me, my social media time is mostly done on Twitter. I do provide a lot of content on YouTube. I have a YouTube page called Bantasmo 1978, which I have a bunch of videos that are pretty long. You can tell I'm loquacious and I have a hard time summarizing, but there's a lot of videos on there that cover a lot of different subjects. Some of them are philosophical. Some of them are specifically to workouts and why I do the particular workouts day to day that I do. I think I've got like a month worth of training on there where I kind of go through, okay, this is what I do with my system for these particular type of athletes. So that's good. And of course, I do have the tome known as the Sprinter's Compendium, which is the largest book on linear speed ever produced. And it has 50 contributors from around the world. It's been sold in over 40 countries. In fact, somebody just picked it up last night in Malaysia. So my dream and hope of paying it forward and learning from these coaches who are respectful and happy for my success, because it could mean their success later. I'm trying to pay that forward. And you can find that book on Amazon or on Vervante, which is my print-on-demand, company that I use to produce my book. And it's good. It's a good book. It's 763 pages, and we go chapter to chapter, which is part of the practice. So I start with the beginning of practice. I work my way all the way through the different steps of order of practice that I would do. Then I have all the stuff that happens outside of practice, which are the chapters like planning, injury prevention, team management, all that stuff. And then the flow of it that I decided to do is my experiences and my stories, my failures. How did I learn to fix those failures? Then what does science say about how to fix those things or to apply solutions? And then after I talk about the science that backs up the solutions, then I have the different 50 coaches who then apply their knowledge and ideas. And my purpose with that is I don't want to give you necessarily a cut and paste, even though there is some of that in there. It's more about, hey, these 50 coaches should make you curious. Why do they do what they do? And they do things very differently, because I wanted you to have a lot of different perspectives when you read it, so that you can apply things that best fit your environment, the age of group of kids you're working with, their training age, their abilities, their sport, what have you. And so, yeah, it's been a long road of that. And I try to give a lot out for free. And so I'm on a lot of podcasts. I'm glad to be on this one. But hopefully that if people like what we had to say here, they can find more in those locations.
Fantastic. Send me all those links, and those will be in the show notes for sure.
Absolutely.
And I want to say thank you very much for your time. Talk some shop, kind of pulling the curtain back on your stories, lessons, and experiences. I enjoyed listening to them, and I'm sure the listener will as well. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our next 2.5 hour chat.
Yeah, buddy. Anytime.